Well, welcome to New York Energy Week 2023. My name is James Rosenstein of One Business World, the hosting platform of New York Energy Week 2023. We are thrilled to welcome you to the most dynamic and influential energy event of the year. New York Energy Week, founded by EnerKnol in 2013, brings together visionaries, experts, and industry leaders from around the globe to explore innovative solutions and shape the future of the energy landscape. So welcome to New York Energy Week 2023, where minds meet, ideas ignite, and the energy revolution begins. It is now with great pleasure that I introduce you to Steve Anglin, the founder and CEO of WeSolar CSP, and Juliana Ennes, who's a journalist specialized in energy markets and the environment. And they will be talking about innovation and progress of concentrated solar power in the USA. So I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, James, for that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Juliana. I am a journalist and writer, and I have covered the energy markets for over a decade now. I have published in different news outlets and have directly worked with some energy companies. One of them, whose CEO is joining us today. I have Steve Anglin with me, the CEO of WeSolar CSP, and we are here today to talk about concentrated solar power. So before I pass over to Steve, I'd like to just start by providing some background to our conversation. President Biden has pledged to fully decarbonize the power sector by 2035, which is right there. This will require massive investments in all forms of renewables, including technologies that are not massively used in the United States, such as offshore wind or concentrated solar power. I would like to start with a very brief and basic overview of solar systems. Solar energy harnessing is primarily achieved through three key technologies. The most common form, the most well-known, is photovoltaics or solar PV, which converts light to electricity directly. The second one is concentrated solar power, or CSP, that utilizes the sun's heat to drive large-scale electricity turbines. And finally, solar heating and cooling systems that accumulates thermal energy mostly for hot water provision and air conditioning. I will not spend any time talking about PV or heating and cooling systems, and will focus on CSP. Concentrated solar power plants utilize mirrors to focus the sun thermal energy, driving a conventional steam turbine to produce electricity. The beauty of CSP is in its ability to store this concentrated thermal energy, enabling electricity production day and night. However, only over 1.4 gigawatts of CSP plants operate in the US right now, with an additional 340 megawatts expected to join the grid within the next year. Meanwhile, solar PV has over 143 gigawatts of installed capacity nationwide. CSP represents today a tiny fraction of solar generation in the United States. And it's not much different in the rest of the world. Europe dominates the concentrated solar power market, with most of the demand coming from Spain, Germany, and the UK. Spain is leading the market ahead of the US due to the country's government schemes and feed-in tariffs. It accounts for almost 40% of the world's CSP market. There are other countries investing on CSP plants as well, such as Chile and Morocco. The Middle East and African region is expected to provide opportunities for the CSP market due to planned investments focused on mobilizing concessional financing and grants to help CSP scale up in the region. So now I would like to bring Steve into the conversation. Steve, you've been in the industry for a while now. So I will talk about advantages a little bit further, but could you start talking a little bit about the challenges that CSP industry faces in terms of high capex and opex, limitation to utility scale projects, supply chain obstacles, things like this?
Well, first I'd like to say thank you, Juliana. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and we have worked together in the past. And you're a wonderful mind when it comes to energy and renewable energy. So my name's Steve Anglin. I'm the CEO and founder and co-founder of WeSolar CSP. Solar thermal is our concentrated solar power, or concentrated solar thermal is where we sit in that space, and there's a lot going on in that space today. So Juliana asked me to tell you a little bit about challenges. So if you were to look at challenges in America, the United States of America, I think there were issues in the past. I would say 2010, there was a lot of projects that were initiated and instigated in the US. I would say the big one is Ivanpah in California. And it was, the CapEx was really high. The levelized cost of electricity was high at that time. There was no storage involved. It was a pretty big project in the realm of 300 megawatts. And it was power tower technology, which is kind of second generation. And there has been some first generation parabolic trough, which is where you have a trough and then there's a cylinder that's filled up with a gas or a heat transfer fluid, and that heats up and that creates steam. So that's first generation. Power towers are these heliostat mirrors that are typically in a circle, and they focus the light to the focal point of the tower, and that heats up the transfer fluid that creates steam. And that steam, industrialized steam, is sometimes in a closed loop, and that creates, obviously, it turns a turbine. That turbine then produces electricity. Typically DC electricity that has to be stepped down to AC, and then it gets pushed into the power lines. I think that's where CSP traditionally has been looked at as an asset to the energy sector in the utility sectors. And that's what's going on around the world. Juliana mentioned it about Spain. I 100% agree with her. There are a lot of other countries in the world that are a little bit further ahead of the US because of these projects we had in 2010 that didn't do well. And PV came in, and PV's costs were better. And the future proof, the fact that it actually worked and it reduced the cost and it's more distributive, made PV better. So the challenge is that, yesterday, call it 10 years ago, we didn't have very good levelized cost of electricity, and the land that's required to do this was very large. Today, if you look at today, that problem has been addressed. And I think the big key, or I call it the killer app, is energy storage, right? So concentrated solar power can do something that PV today can't, which is store the energy that it makes and then use that energy in the peaker moments when the actual energy is required. What PV has, they have to go to another form of electricity called batteries or lithium ion or various different types of storage. So that's the biggest challenge, and I think that's being addressed today.
Yes, Steve, you touched something that I think it's important for us to take a deeper dive into, which is like the cost of having storage as well. Because installing PV arrays is way cheaper than CSP today, but it's an intermittent source of energy, right? And nowadays we are seeing a lot more projects bringing batteries together with the PV arrays, and this certainly increases the cost a lot. So could you talk about the difference? I don't know if you have a comparison in terms of costs between PV batteries, PV plus batteries, and comparing to CSP, but even if you don't have, just to talk about like the how different CSP is in terms of already having this storage together.
Good question, Juliana. The fact that PV is probably the cheapest form of energy or electricity currently today. It's cheaper than probably coal, cheaper than gas. I think it's in the 1 to 2 cents. Some of these bids that are going out, 3 cents per kilowatt hour. That's very affordable, and which is, you know, brilliant, right? Now, the problem with that is that PV works and it's very affordable, but it doesn't work at night. And typically, when we need lights, or at night, right, when the sun goes down, so they couple it. And what's been going on this year, last year, I think there's some policy that came out around anytime you have a solar farm, PV solar farm, you want to couple that with battery technology, which is why in the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a lot of rules around incentive tax credits and production tax credits for battery storage, right? So this is, they're trying to make the costs, you know, incent people to put the batteries with the PV. So that is the way, that's the wave that's happening in this country, and it's going to continue to happen, because I think over time the cost of the batteries will come down. So the economies of scale, the money that's being invested into battery technology, will ultimately bring down the cost. Unfortunately, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the actual cost, because that varies based on the part of the country or the region of the world. So I don't want to go into that debate. But I can tell you that it's significantly higher than 3 or 4 cents per kilowatt hour. And that cost, you know, because people are being mandated to do this, they're just eating the cost. But the cost actually doesn't make it very economical. When you put PV plus storage, it doesn't make it very attractive. The alternate to that is something like concentrated solar power. And if you look at places, other countries in the world, Middle East, North Africa, Spain, Israel, Australia, what they're doing is they're doing storage through heat transfer fluids. And it could be varied based on what the off-taker wants. And that storage is very affordable. So now you've got daytime electricity and you have nighttime, and I call it medium term or medium duration storage. Some people call it long duration energy storage. But I think, you know, now that we're looking at seasonal storage and things like that, I think that medium term energy storage is a good way to look at it, Juliana, to say that concentrated solar power can produce 6 to 10, even 12 hours. That covers the entire night. And you can still have electricity that's clean, green, and sustainable.
I think this leads us to maybe a deeper conversation into the different uses related to CSP. So if you could just explain a little bit about like how it could be used for heat, thermal power, storage, hydrogen. Talk a little bit about the different uses of CSP.
Yeah, great. That's a really great question. I think this is where concentrated solar power sort of separates itself a little bit and then really starts to look at being a real alternative to PV, right? I think a lot of people now, especially now, and then COP28 is coming up in Dubai, people are looking at the harder areas the term is harder areas to abate, sectors of the economy, of industry, because we know that most of the hydrocarbons, sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, methane, all of that stuff is coming from industry. Yeah, you know, some of it's coming from producing electricity from coal-fired power plants, but most of the problems are coming from making steel, glass, cement, plastics, you know, fiberglass, you know, all these things. We have to burn something to heat up a kiln, and that kiln will melt the metal, aluminum, or whatever the case may be that we use in our everyday lives, right? So that heat is called industrial process heat, right? And most companies, you name the industry, I don't want to throw out names, but most of the big companies and corporations in America, they use heat. And how do they get the heat? They usually pipe in gas, and they burn the gas, and that gas causes a lot of problems with the ozone. So the applications, the first application, I think the lowest hanging fruit for concentrated solar power or concentrated solar thermal is the application of solar industrial process heat. So now you can do the same, you can get to the same temperatures. We were just tested, I don't want to promote my company too much, but we were tested this year, and we could get up to 1,200 Celsius. And that heat can do a lot of things. You know, it can melt chocolates and roast peanuts for candy companies. It can melt aluminum for cans that need to be recycled. We recycle our stuff every day, glass, things like this. We can now melt those down in a clean way and recycle them. And then that's the first one, right? That's the easiest industrial process heat. I think the total available market for that is hundreds of billions of dollars, right? Just in the heat aspect. And that's in the US, probably even more outside of the US. So the second area that I think is also a very hot topic is the production of hydrogen, right? So everyone's talking today about green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, brown hydrogen. You know, the colors only really mean how is that hydrogen made. So brown means it's made the way it is today, which is steam methane reforming, and we're burning some sort of gas, right, to do that. And then if you talk about blue hydrogen, they're still making it the same way, but there's sequestration involved, and we're doing our best to capture the carbon dioxide, and then we pump it into the ground. That's blue hydrogen. And I think that's the way that a lot of oil and gas companies can pretty much, if you look at the long game and how they stay in this business, it's basically through hydrogen and pretty much blue hydrogen. And then there's green hydrogen, which is made with solar and wind, which we can also do that. We can provide, the difference between solar and wind is that it gets expensive, right? The cost per kilogram, the dollars per kilogram is extremely expensive when you do it the green way. So there's in the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a lot of, what do you call it, incentives to bring down the cost. I think by the end of 2035, they want to make it close to $3 per kilogram. And today it's done less than that. So there's a green premium to do it green. And then I would say, so that hydrogen is another one. And what we've done, we've written a white paper on how you can actually split water through heat. And that will allow you to break that bond of the molecule of water and siphon off the hydrogen. And that's called, well, it's still green, right? And there's turquoise, where a lot of companies that produce methane, right? When they pipe it up, they get methane, and methane is C4H, right? It's basically got hydrogen molecules on there, and basically you can use heat and strip off the hydrogen and then basically capture the carbon. So it's a combination of blue and green. It's called turquoise, and then there's a few others. But I think that's a big market for concentrated solar power, is the production of hydrogen. And then the last one that maybe people don't really talk about too much is water desalination. We can actually either power the desalination machines that does reverse osmosis, or we can actually use our heat again to distill water to make it portable. And I think in a lot of regions of the world, say sub-Saharan Africa, maybe even places in India or some desert areas of the world, water is a real problem. and being able to desalinate the water could save lives. And every day we need to drink water. So I think that's another area that people aren't looking at. And I always think that, you know, if we have another pandemic, you know, water is going to be a big part of that. So I think those are the big applications. I didn't mention electricity. Obviously, electricity is something that is being done today with concentrated solar. The Chinese are crushing it over there with very large concentrated solar power plants. I know I just came back from the Middle East. There's a lot of very big solar mostly power tower projects going on in the Middle East, in MENA, and that includes Morocco as well. They're 50% of all their electricity is green, most of it is CSP. So those are like the big four areas where concentrated solar power could be used in America. I think that we are a little bit behind, but I think there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of cool companies that are coming up that are doing it in the US, and we're doing it with the third generation, which is modular, which looks like microgrids, not so big because land is a scarce resource. So we can talk about that later.
Yeah, you mentioned something. You talked about solar power tower systems. So I'd like just to use this to clarify a little bit about the different technologies involving CSP, because it's not all of the same, right? I think to understand solar PV is more, I don't know, it's simpler because it's straightforward. You just use mirrors and that's it. But CSP has different, traditional CSP plants has different types of technologies. So we could be talking about parabolic through systems, which use curved mirrors in parallel rows to focus the sunlight onto a receiver tube, heating a fluid that drives a steam turbine to generate electricity. Another type of CSP plants is the compact linear Fresnel reflector. The CLFR employs the same principles, but uses cost-effective flat mirrors to focus sunlight into elevated receivers, generating high-pressure steam for power production. Then we come to the power tower systems that you mentioned, which employ a central receiver and a computer-controlled mirror to concentrate sunlight, generate steam, and drive a power generator. We've added capacity for around-the-clock energy storage. And lastly, dish engines, which use mirrors on a parabolic dish to focus sunlight onto a receiver, which heats a fluid, such as hydrogen, for example, to drive an engine, with each dish rotating to track the sun's path. So with that, I'd like to understand a little bit more about what WeSolar CSP is doing. How does your technology differ from the others? And how these could impact affordability? What are the uses that you guys are making of this?
Thank you, Juliana. And you're absolutely right, your definitions of the different types of CSP. And I like to say concentrated solar power and concentrated solar thermal, because when you start to look at applications, not all the time are you going to go and convert it to electricity, where the capacity factor and the efficiency goes down a lot when you convert it to electricity. If you look at heat, all right, and I know this sounds kind of quirky, but for us, the lowest hanging fruit is steam, right? Just making the steam or creating the heat, and that could be used in industry today. Right, we don't have to wait 6 months, 3 years, 2025, 2020. You know, we can do it right now, right? We can. And when we're talking to companies now who have huge carbon footprints, that they need to reduce those carbon footprints. And what we do is say, hey, you guys are burning a dinosaur or you're burning oil or gas to create heat. And if you're a confectionery company that makes candy, you're burning gas to create heat, to melt chocolates and roast peanuts to make candy, right? Now that heat level is not that high. It's probably 150 to 250 Celsius, if that, right? It's not very high. So what we could do is, and our proposal is, we just co-locate. We just set up a small 1 to 5 megawatt concentrated solar power or thermal plant and then we push our steam. I'm not sure you can see me. We push our steam into their steam. They're burning a fossil fuel to get steam, and we then, but it's not 100%. So we push our steam in. Now they're only burning 75% because our steam is clean and they've reduced their carbon footprint. So that's a very simple and affordable way to decarbonize. It doesn't cost hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. It's very affordable. And I think when you're a business and you're in the business of, you know, making money and keeping your costs down, I think that's the way you want to do it. So that's one way. The other thing I'd like to say is when you look at underserved communities in America, I think that there's a lot of applications that we can bring to cities and urban centers that right now they're not really being looked at, right? So that's a big part of my mission, is to bring CSP to cities. And we've actually signed 2 deals with 2 cities to make a solar microgrid, right? And when we make that grid, we can put it in a corporate park, and then all the companies in there can get clean electricity and maybe clean heat if they need it. And that's a good way, especially for the urban centers. That's one way to do it. And then, or it will attract companies to those cities who typically wouldn't go there in a million years, right? So, but now they can get clean steam, clean energy, clean up their footprint, and do something to give back to the community. I think that's another way that CSP can help. And that's what PV can do, right? So when you look at the beauty of our technology, if you think about PV, it's distributive. You can put panels on your roof, on the car park, on top of the house. You could take a couple of panels and put them anywhere, and you could put them on a light post and produce electricity, right? That's brilliant, right? It works. It's distributive. You cannot do that with a traditional parabolic trough or power tower CSP plant. You just can't, because they're huge. But you can with our technology, because what we've done is we've made it modular. From day one, we were modular. We're small. We can put one concentrator. Too bad I don't have any video to show you guys, but we can create 110 kilowatts with concentrated solar and do it 24 hours a day. And there's a lot of opportunity for this type of off-the-grid energy and electricity that we can bring, not just to cities and industry, but to even communities that are sort of outside of the urban center and sort of rural, and they're not connected to the grid at all. Or it could be oil or whatever companies are sort of distant and they cannot get plugged into the grid. That's the opportunities that we can address 24/7 without the battery. We use thermal batteries as opposed to lithium ion.
Could you just clarify a little bit why this is not happening with other types of CSP, and how you can, because it's really interesting to have like the generation close to the end user, right? Which is like one of the biggest problems with the development of renewable projects right now in the US, which is like interconnection and having transmission lines. This is delaying a lot of projects, especially for wind, even more than solar, but still, having the production closer to the users is something that I think it's really important. We are seeing this like in the East Coast, for example, with offshore wind. Some project developers are preferring to do this instead of having power plants really far. New York always had this type of problem. We bring energy from Canada. I don't know. So how do you make it possible? Because other CSP plants are not doing this. So
So I'll give you two examples. And I think that you really hit on something that, the more and more you go into renewable energy, right? So if you look at today, most of our electricity is produced by fossil fuels in America today. It's been doing it. We look at it as we need electricity at any cost. We can't have the system go down. So that's why fossil fuels are so big. So renewable energy, especially CSP, is big, and you have to bring that electricity in on the grid. So we've got two examples right now where the off-taker, we can do it behind the meter, right? So we don't have to be connected to the grid. We can just do it right there behind the meter and give them what they need in a clean, sustainable, resilient way. One example, and I can't go into details for many reasons, is where we making hydrogen, right? And, the idea is to pipe that hydrogen in, to a location very far away. That cost per mile is expensive, right? And my idea is, well, we could just, it's called over the fence, right? We can co-locate and produce that hydrogen right there where it's needed. So I think that those are some of it's a great question, right? People want renewable energy, but, how do you get it to where it has to go is not easy. There's always this question about transmission lines, and we need to build that out as well. So having the option to do it directly behind the meter is a way to ramp up quicker, as opposed to plugging into the grid and applying for permits. And we know that can be a slippery slope. So.
I think this relates directly to a question that we received from the audience. Nicholas Barbakis is asking, Nevada is to become the leader in solar-produced electricity power, but many are opposing. Large-scale solar fields run the risk of displacing native plants and animal life, contributing to ferocious dust storms and disturbing fragile desert soil capable of capturing much needed moisture from the air. What is your professional opinion on this, if you have any?
Yeah, Nicholas, we thought about this. Nicholas, great question. So when we were in the early days, we thought about this, right? We thought about the business model and what was wrong with CSP, right? And how can we not make it destroy the environment and the soil and kill birds and things like this. So again, maybe another day I'll have an actual presentation that I can show you. But just to sum up and answer your question, the first is we concentrate the light down. We're not a parabolic dish. And the difference between a parabolic dish and what we do is a parabolic dish is like, it's like this, and then there's a point and it moves in space tracking the sun. That's a parabolic dish. It has flexible joints because it gets to very, very high temperatures, right? But it has to track the sun, and then you've got to have a flexible joint. That flexible joint can't hold really high temperatures because it has to be something that's flexible, right? And I think that's a problem with the parabolic dish. So what we do is we shine the light down. That avoids a lot of problems, right? So typically with the heliostat towers, are these big circles, they look like something from space, and they shine the light up into a tower. But when you shine the light up, there's something called a flux, right? A flux. And if a bird were to fly through that flux, it'll get very damaged, telling you. So that's not good, and that's not good for America. Maybe this is why, the US kind of backed out of CSP, who knows? But it's not good for that kind of stuff. And also, you mentioned destroying the ecosystem on the ground, and maybe turtles and grass, and that's used to absorb the sunlight and produce carbon dioxide, absorb the carbon dioxide. So yeah, I get it, right? So we looked at that. So one of the things that we really pride ourselves on, Nick, is that we don't need contiguous land to provide. And we have a great schematic that I usually show when I'm presenting that shows the ASCs, which is what our technology is called, where we can be on the side of the hill, we can be, on ground that's not been, wiped out and put concrete on. We don't need that. we're one within the environment, right? And that's a big deal. We're not killing animals. We're not destroying the environment. That's a big, big deal. So you gave us a great question. There's a picture of, we've built a demonstration plant already, right? So there's a great picture that I always show of a bird actually on our tech while it's maybe cleaning its feathers or whatever. So it's not being damaged, it's not being killed. So a great question, but we thought about that in our business model, and that's how we designed our technology so it wouldn't affect animals or, you know, or the environment.
Steve, we have another question from the audience. You mentioned it's from Adil Sumro. I hope I said it correctly. So you mentioned that CSP can provide efficient, affordable power 24/7. Can you explain in more detail how modular CSP is getting around the storage issue of power, providing 24 power that PV is unable to do in the same way, as well benefit of thermal batteries versus lithium-ion batteries?
Yeah, it's a good question. Who asked the question? What's his name?
Adil Sumro.
Adil? Adil?
Adil.
Adil, that's a great question, right? So look, this is the, you want to call it the holy grail of renewable energy, is that it's intermittent. It doesn't work at night, or when the wind's not blowing, it doesn't work. So you need some sort of storage, right? I'm in the business, I'm telling you the truth. So unless there's technology that comes out, nanotechnology or graphene technology that can work at night, which I know they're looking at, but it's not out, it's not ready, it's not affordable, it's not scalable yet. So right now, solar works during the day. So his question was, how do you address storage? And can you compare that storage to PV storage? We're using batteries as opposed to a thermal battery with CSP. So I'll break it down in very easy chunks, consumable chunks, right? So PV works, and there's a big area on the duck curve. The duck curve is how we track the production of electricity. In the middle of the day is called curtailment, right? That's when solar panels produce probably the most electricity, but it's not being stored, right? And for our technology, during that curtailment period, we store the energy. And again, we store it in a way that matches the off-taker. So whoever the client is, say it's a steel company, right? And they need 1,200 or 1,500 Celsius heat to make steel, to melt iron and whatever else they need to do to make steel, or concrete or cement, right? So we would use a transfer fluid, and I'm not going to get into all the details, but we use very affordable, natural transfer fluids. So if it's 1,000 or 1,500 degrees that we have to get to, we could use rocks, basalt, ceramics. There are certain materials now that can get up to that temperature. And once they get there, they hold that heat for hours. You know, we know that the percentage loss in CSP is 1% per day. So when you hold that heat, we can hold it for a long time. And then what we do, and that's the thermal battery, right? And then with that, we can then push up cold air to produce the heat that will heat up the water to create the steam. That's how we do electricity 24 hours a day. When the sun goes down, is when we, I think, win, right? Because we can't compete, really. CSP will find it very hard to compete with PV during the day. And the way I look at it is not to compete with them, is to do something called a polynomial power plant. So you use the PV during the day, and then you use the CSP at night, because now you've got two affordable ways to do electricity, and that's how you cover the entire 24-hour day. as opposed to a battery. Now, we will need lithium-ion batteries, right? The problem with lithium-ion batteries, and this is something that the people that build them can tell you, they're expensive, right? They're expensive to buy, they're expensive to, they only last for 10, maybe 10, 12 years, maybe 15 if you get the really new ones, but they're very, they don't last, we last for 25, 30 years. That's how long our battery lasts. The battery lasts for 15 years. Now, the benefits of a lithium-ion battery is that it ramps up quickly. And, you know, but it only goes for 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours a day, if 5, maybe 4 hours. And then you got to go back to the grid. So, you know, there's pluses and minuses with that. And then the levelized cost of storage, or the LCOS, is, you know, it make your eye open. It's actually really expensive. Now that price is coming down, but it's not cheap, right? So you have to do the financial analysis and weigh in that cost of storage plus the very cheap cost of PV. And once you do that weighted average, that's where you're, you know, that's the cost of getting, you know, maybe PV plus batteries. And with us, what we try to do is, you know, our cost of storage, because our heat transfer fluids, and it could be water, it could be mineral oil, it could be rocks, like I said, so it's concrete, cement, basalt, ceramics. We have, based on the heat levels that we have to get to, we can use different materials, but we still can keep the CSP plus storage is a cheaper option than PV plus batteries. And that's why you're seeing it around the world, right? You're seeing these polynomial plants where it's like a microgrid. You have PV and then you have CSP. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't want to go into the numbers because that could be a little bit of a, you know, debate.
Yeah, Steve, we have another question, but I think you have addressed that, just asking if CSP can produce sufficient heat to process metal, or you talked about this. So I would like actually to use the.
Can I answer that? So he said metal, or she said metal. Is it brass, steel, you know, aluminum? We can do that. We've actually proven it. There's videos I can show. I was actually in Dubai 2 weeks ago, in Abu Dhabi, where we have a demonstration plant, and we brought 7 companies to the facility and demonstrated that we can melt metal with the sunlight. You know, that is a game changer, right? It's different when I'm just talking, but when you can actually demonstrate it and show it. So the answer to the question is yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we are just in the final moments. I would like to ask you to use these last few minutes just to address what do you think is going to happen with the CSP industry, especially in the US? Where do you think it's going? Are you optimistic or not? I don't know. How are you looking into also your competitors, not just for WeSolar, but the industry as a whole? Where do you think it's going the next few years?
I'll keep the answer short. I think the future is bright. I think the future is bright. I think with everything, people have to find out and they have to see that it works. And when it works, I think, you know, what was the future of electric cars in 2010? Who knew, right? When Tesla came out, who knew? So what I would say is there are a couple of companies out there that are doing it. They have a different business model. There's a couple of my friends that run companies in Australia, and they're raising hundreds of millions of dollars to do CSP. There's companies in the US that have done the same thing, bigger than us, but same business model. So we probably get to that size as well. I look at the opportunity as being huge. Again, I'll say this again, I'll be really clear about it. I don't want it just to be for industry. I want to figure out a way we can reach the underserved communities, whether it be the indigenous people of America or people in the inner cities that are, you know, that can also benefit from this. and I feel like there's an energy transition that's happening right under our nose. And I'd like to be able to bring that to everyone. And just to finish up answer your question, my outlook is I have to be the optimist, right? But it's been difficult, right, in the US. And I think this was difficult because of what happened in the past with big plants that cost billions of dollars that really didn't, do it well, right? The efficiencies, the cost, the economics, all of those things didn't go well, and people got burned. And they said, you know what? We're not doing this. We're going to go with PV. So now those companies went overseas, and they're doing really well in Australia and China and Israel and Middle East. And now it's come back to the US with my company and maybe a few other companies out there. And I think that it would behoove, and I think the US government is looking into this a lot with the Department of Energy. We talk a lot with NREL, and NREL stands for the National Renewable Energy Lab, and Sandia Labs as well, those guys. So I think that there's a lot of money going into some really advanced technologies. For instance, there's something called supercritical carbon dioxide that we can do with concentrated solar power. We wouldn't need a turbine. There's a lot of really advanced technologies around hydrogen production, which we know hydrogen is going to be a big part of everyone's future, because when you burn it, you get water. It's clean. So I think the concentrated solar power's future is bright. And, there's a lot of development over the next 5 years, 7 years, that you will see more and more companies, maybe American companies, maybe foreign companies coming to the US because of the Inflation Reduction Act, and making us more of a cleaner society.
Well, thank you so much for that, Steve. Thank you, everyone, for participating and engaging in this discussion. I think New York Energy Week someone from the organization has something to say, but well, I just would like to thank you a lot, and hope to see you soon again.
Thank you, Juliana. And again, I think the last time we met was at COP26 in Scotland. We had dinner. So you're wonderful. You're wonderful. You're smart. You know your stuff. And it's a pleasure doing this interview with you.
Well, I just want to thank you both on behalf of One Business World and this event. So many thorough answers to so many difficult and interesting questions, which I think we all need to understand to see where it's going. I had some questions as well. I think we are pretty much running out of time.
Go ahead, throw it out there.
Well, one thing I really appreciated was your reference to the role of hydrogen, because there's a lot of talk about hydrogen becoming a main source of fuel for automobiles and for a lot of other things. So do you really see strong growth of hydrogen coming our way?
Okay, so that if you're looking at a global answer, the answer is yes. If you're looking at a US answer, I would say, I've had conversations about this. So there are certain economies in the world, i.e. Japan, that are very hydrogen centric. And they definitely, because of 311 and Fukushima, they do not want nuclear plants there. So hydrogen is a way for them to, because there's not a lot of natural resources. I think that in that country, in that part of the world, hydrogen, is a game changer, right? In America, I think that it's, hydrogen is very difficult to transport. It's very tiny. It's very hard to transport. But I think that if you stick a nitrogen on there, you get ammonia, all right? And then you can ship it, you can send it anywhere on a train and then you can crack it back into hydrogen. So that's good for shipping. That's good for, there are industries that could use hydrogen as a fuel, right? So there's the rail, shipping, heavy industry could use hydrogen. The problem is, how do you make it, right? And I didn't even go into, when I was in the Middle East, I learned about orange hydrogen, never heard of that one. I know all the colors, but I've never heard of orange. It comes from rocks, iron ore. You can get orange hydrogen, green, blue, turquoise, brown, white hydrogen, pink. Pink hydrogen comes from nuclear. And folks are looking at that, how they can take nuclear, which is clean, create electricity, and that electricity will power the electrolyzer. Another thing I would say is with CSP, is I had a conversation yesterday with I won't disclose the source, but there are electrolyzers that can actually take steam. So now we can produce steam, clean, green steam, and we can create hydrogen. So the answer to your question is hydrogen is the future, 100%, right? Wow. Right now, we've got the oil and gas companies in countries like the UAE and places like that. They're swimming in a bunch of oil, right? They have a lot of oil for hundreds of years. This isn't going away, right? But they look at the demand for oil is going down as the generations move on. They don't want to burn oil anymore. So I was just in the UAE, they want to be cleaner, greener, and sustainable. And what their solution to that problem is hydrogen, right? You can take methane or oil, when you dig for oil, you come up with methane, right? So you can take the methane, you can make hydrogen out of it, and that's clean. So this is an ongoing discussion. I know that in Europe, they just passed something called RED2, RED 2, stands for Renewable Energy Directive. Don't ask me how I know this stuff, but that is their version of our RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard, but it's for hydrogen. So the Europeans are now all in on hydrogen, right? So we could talk about this in a completely different session, but CSP is going to play a role in that, trust me.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. The only other question I had in my mind was, what are the main sources of resistance to change that continue? Of course, you can think of the oil industry, you can think of politics, you can think of society, but where do you see the main resistance to change?
Well, I had a conversation yesterday morning in Florida, and it was with a guy. He told me he doesn't believe in renewable energy. He thinks it's, hocus pocus or whatever. And I don't think he knew who I was, right? So I listened to him. And I think there's a lot of people in this country, America, that they don't believe the hype. They just don't. And it's not going to be as easy. I mean, in New York and California, it's cool, but there's a lot of parts of America that they're just not going to, stop burning fuel. They think there's a whole conspiracy behind it. So that is a big problem, right? And I'm sensitive to that, right? So, I mean, I do preach what I preach, but I also try to convert people and say, look, this is good for your grandkids, your grandparents, So I think the oil and gas industry, they've drank the Kool-Aid, right? So now I think some of these companies, they don't want to be called oil company anymore. They want to be called an energy company. So they're looking at their board and their senior management, they're getting beaten up by the board saying, what are you doing for ESG and, TCFDs and all that stuff, right? So the world is changing. I think that we can see that the ozone is being destroyed by the coal plants that we don't see. They're not in our neighborhoods. They're far away, belching out a lot of bad stuff. So we've had satellites for the last 30 years. We can see the weather. We can see the polar ice caps. We can see the ozone. We can see all that now. It's science, right? So, but yeah, the biggest resistance is there's some people with their head in the sand that don't believe in evolution and stuff like that. So it's not an easy problem to solve, that's for sure.
No.
I just wanted to add something to that. I agree with you. I think that part of the resistance, though, is because of the lack of knowledge. So a lot of states that depend, for example, on coal for jobs, they think that replacing fossil fuel power generation with renewable will take those jobs away. But they don't know that renewables are actually generating a lot more new jobs than a coal power plant would produce. So I think it's just a matter of, well, first explaining this, and second, training people, because yes, it's a new industry, so there is a lack of skills in some parts of the country. So this will require a bigger investment in training and education. But I think that when people understand that it is a game changer, both for the environment, for cost of electricity, and also for job generation, I think the resistance will reduce a lot, and people will get behind renewables.
Just to follow up with you, Juliana, I feel like the economy is a big part of this, right? The problem is, you know, the grid is probably the most amazing machine ever built in the world, right? Other than the Tesla batteries are pretty good too. But it's hard to, you know, it's so complicated, the entire grid of the United States, and it gives us electricity on demand whenever we want it, right? We don't rarely have power outages in America, and it's all been done by fossil fuels. So this is like turning around the Titanic, right? It's not going to be easy. And I think it's going to take many years for renewables to kind of get a hold. Now, the benefit of that is a guy called Joe Biden and the Department of Energy Secretary, Ram Hall. These guys are on their front foot. And I think that they're pushing companies like mine and other companies to get it done, right? You're not going to get many opportunities like this. Because there is a force against us. And it was a great question, by the way. Yeah.
Wow, we could continue this conversation for a long time. I can think of many more questions, but let's hope that those who are in positions of power listen to you. And let's hope that we go forward in the right way. And I want to thank you very much for all that you've contributed, for the context you put it in, and the explanations, which are extremely helpful. And we thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. Thank you, Juliana.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, James. It was a
Thank you,
great
James.